On Christmas morning, I saw my daughter-in-law toss a suitcase into the frozen lake near our cottage in upstate New York. The sound it made when it hit the ice still haunts me, a sharp crack that seemed to split my world in two. I knew in that moment that everything I had ever given, everything I had ever sacrificed, was sinking with it into those dark waters. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Margaret, and I'm 73 years old. I live in a small apartment in Queens, New York, where the radiator clanks like old bones and the winter wind rattles my windows until I can't sleep. For the past 15 years, since my husband Harold died, I've been the family's foundation, the one everyone turns to when they need money, when they need someone to blame, when they need someone to disappear into the background of their successful lives. That Christmas morning started like so many others in recent years. I woke up alone in my narrow bed, my arthritis making my joints ache with every movement. The apartment was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic on Northern Boulevard. I had prepared for weeks, buying gifts I couldn't afford, planning meals that would mostly go uneaten, hoping this Christmas would be different, hoping my family would finally see me as more than just a bank account with legs. I remember standing in my tiny kitchen, wearing the same blue house dress I'd worn the Christmas before and the one before that. My hands shook as I poured coffee into the chipped mug Harold had given me 30 years ago. It read, "World's Best Wife," in fading gold letters, and I wondered if anyone would ever think I was the world's best anything again. The phone rang at 8:30. My heart leaped. Maybe it was my son David calling to wish me Merry Christmas. Maybe telling me he was coming to pick me up early for dinner at their house in Long Island. Maybe this year would be different. It was my daughter-in-law, Jessica. Her voice was cold, mechanical, like she was reading from a script. "Margaret, we need to talk. Can you meet us at the lake house this morning? It's important." The lake house? Harold and I had bought that little cottage 40 years ago when David was just 10. We'd saved every penny from my job as a social worker and Harold's work at the post office. It was our dream, a place where our family could gather, where memories could be made. Now it felt like a mausoleum, holding the ghosts of happier times. I took the Long Island Railroad, then a taxi that cost me $60 I didn't really have. The driver was a kind Sikh man who noticed my hands trembling as I counted out the bills. "You okay, ma'am?" he asked, and I almost broke down right there. When was the last time someone had asked if I was okay? When was the last time anyone had really seen me? The cottage looked smaller than I remembered, its white paint peeling, the wraparound porch sagging under the weight of too many harsh winters. David's BMW was already in the driveway, and I could see smoke rising from the chimney. For a moment, my heart lifted. Maybe they were making it cozy for us. Maybe this was going to be a real family Christmas after all. I knocked on the door. My own door. The door of the house I still owned, though I'd been letting them use it rent-free for 3 years. Jessica answered, her perfectly styled blonde hair caught in the golden morning light, her designer coat probably costing more than I spent on groceries in 6 months. She looked at me like I was something unpleasant she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. "Come in," she said, not meeting my eyes. "David's in the kitchen." The house smelled like expensive coffee and bacon, foods I could smell but knew I wouldn't be offered to share. My stomach growled. I'd been too nervous to eat breakfast, and the $40 grocery trip I'd made yesterday to prepare Christmas dinner for them now seemed foolish and presumptuous. David stood by the kitchen island, his back to me. When he turned around, I saw my son, my baby boy who I'd rocked to sleep, who I'd worked double shifts to put through college, who I'd given my entire life savings to help start his investment business. But the man looking at me wasn't the child I remembered. This was someone cold, someone who looked at me with embarrassment instead of love. "Mom," he said, and even that one word felt forced. "We need to discuss some things." Jessica moved to stand beside him, a united front against me. She was holding something, a thick manila envelope that made my chest tighten with dread. "Margaret," Jessica said. She never called me Mom, never even called me Margaret with any warmth. "We've been reviewing the financial situation, and we think it's time for some changes." "Financial situation?" as if my life was a business problem to be solved. She opened the envelope and spread papers across the granite countertop. Bank statements, copies of checks, a detailed accounting that made my blood run cold. Every loan I'd given them, every emergency I'd helped with, every time I'd said yes when I should have said no. It was all there in black and white. "Look at this," Jessica said, pointing at the numbers with a manicured fingernail. $50,000 over 2 years. "Mom, that's not sustainable." Not sustainable. As if love could be calculated on a spreadsheet. I was helping," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of my own heart breaking. "You said David's business was struggling, that you needed help with the mortgage, with Emma's school fees." Emma, my granddaughter. My precious 10-year-old Emma, who used to call me Grammy and beg to spend weekends at my apartment, who would sit on my lap while I read her stories and braided her hair. I hadn't seen Emma in 6 months. Every time I asked, there was an excuse. She was busy with school, with friends, with activities. "Where's Emma?" I asked, looking around the empty house. "I brought her presents." David and Jessica exchanged a look, one of those married couple looks that communicated volumes without words. Jessica's mouth tightened into a thin line. "Emma is with my parents for the holidays," she said. "We thought it would be better. Better. Better than spending Christmas with her grandmother. Better than being around the old woman who loved her more than life itself." That's when I saw the suitcase. It was sitting by the back door, old and battered with brass corners that had gone green with age. I recognized it immediately. It was Harold's. The suitcase he'd carried when we'd taken our honeymoon to Niagara Falls. The one we'd used for every family vacation when David was young. It was supposed to be full of memories, of photographs and keepsakes from our life together. "Why do you have Harold's suitcase?" I asked. Jessica picked it up, and I heard things shifting inside. Heavy things, metal things. My heart started pounding. "Margaret," she said, "this old junk has been cluttering up the attic for years. We're cleaning house, making space. Some things just need to go." "What things?" I stepped toward her, but David moved between us. "Mom, it's just old papers. Some of Dad's tools that don't work anymore. Stuff that's just taking up space. Nothing important." Nothing important. Harold's tools weren't important? The photographs of our life together weren't important? The love letters he'd written me during his deployment in Vietnam weren't important? "Let me see," I said, reaching for the suitcase. "Let me look through it first. There might be things I want to keep." "No, Mom." David's voice was firm, final. "We've already been through everything. Trust us. Trust us." The 2 words that had been my downfall for 15 years. I watched in horror as Jessica walked toward the back door, the suitcase heavy in her hands. The lake stretched out behind the house, frozen solid in the December cold, covered with a thin layer of snow that sparkled like broken glass in the morning sun. "What are you doing?" I called out, following her onto the porch. "Getting rid of clutter," she said simply. And then, before I could stop her, before I could even process what was happening, she lifted Harold's suitcase and threw it hard onto the ice. The sound it made when it hit, that sharp crack I mentioned, seemed to echo across the entire frozen lake. For a moment, the suitcase sat there on the surface, surrounded by spiderweb cracks in the ice. Then, slowly, inevitably, it broke through and sank into the dark water below. I stood there in the bitter cold, watching the ripples spread across the hole where my husband's memory had just disappeared. I felt something inside me break, something fundamental and irreparable. It wasn't just the loss of his things. It was the casual cruelty of it, the dismissive way my pain was brushed aside. "How could you?" I whispered, but Jessica had already gone back inside. I stayed on that porch for what felt like hours, staring at the hole in the ice, watching it slowly start to freeze over again. When I finally went back inside, David and Jessica were sitting at the kitchen table, looking at me with expressions I couldn't read. "Mom," David said, his voice gentler now, "sit down. We need to finish talking." I sat, my hands folded in my lap, my whole body numb from more than just the cold. Jessica pulled out more papers, legal documents this time, with official seals and signatures. "Margaret, We've been talking to a financial advisor, and we think it would be best if you moved into a smaller place, somewhere more manageable for someone your age. Someone my age. As if being 73 made me incapable of making my own decisions. This apartment in Queens, she continued, sliding a brochure across the table. It's specifically designed for seniors. Very affordable. You'd have so much less to worry about. I looked at the brochure. The building looked like a prison. Gray concrete, tiny windows, communal dining rooms where I'd eat processed food with other forgotten old people. I like my apartment, I said quietly. I've lived there for 8 years. My neighbors know me. I have friends. What friends, Mom? David asked. And the question cut deep because it was true. I'd isolated myself over the years, spending all my time and energy on my family, letting other relationships wither away. Mrs. Chen from next door, I said. She brings me soup when I'm sick. That's not the same as having real friends, Jessica said with a patronizing smile. At this new place, you'd have activities. People your own age to socialize with. It would be good for you. Good for me. Like everything they did was for my own benefit. How much does it cost? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Only $1,800 a month, Jessica said brightly. Much less than you're paying now for that big apartment. I was paying $1,200 for my apartment. This place would cost me $600 more. Money I didn't have. Not after all the loans over the years. I'll need to think about it, I said. Actually, Mom, David said, avoiding my eyes. We already put down a deposit. They have a unit available starting February 1st. We thought it would be good to get you settled before the spring. They'd already decided. Without asking me, without even pretending to care what I wanted, they'd chosen where I would live the rest of my life. I don't understand, I said. And I heard my voice getting smaller, more fragile. I thought we were family. I thought you cared about what I wanted. We do care, David said, but his words felt hollow, rehearsed. This is caring. This is looking out for your best interests. My best interests. Not my happiness, not my autonomy, not my dignity. Just my best interests, as defined by people who saw me as a burden to manage. And what about the lake house? I asked. What about this place? Another look passed between them. Well, Jessica said slowly, since you'll be in managed care, you won't really need the house anymore. We were thinking we could take over the deed, handle the maintenance and taxes. It would be one less thing for you to worry about. One less thing for me to worry about. The house Harold and I had saved for, had dreamed of, had made love in and raised our son in. Just one less thing to worry about. I felt dizzy, like the world was tilting sideways. Everything I owned, everything I'd worked for, my entire life was being dismantled piece by piece, and I was supposed to be grateful for their efficiency. I need some air, I said, standing up too quickly and having to grab the table for support. Mom, are you okay? David asked, but he made no move to help me. I'm fine, I lied, because that's what I'd been doing for years, lying about being fine, pretending everything was acceptable when it wasn't. I walked outside again, back to the porch where I'd watched my husband's memory sink into the lake. The sun was higher now, but it gave no warmth. I could see my breath in white puffs, could feel the cold seeping through my thin coat and settling into my bones. This was what my life had become. This was the reward for 30 years of putting my family first, for sacrificing my own dreams and desires to support theirs. I was being managed, like a problematic asset in David's investment portfolio. I thought about all the money I'd given them over the years. $50,000. Money I'd saved working double shifts at the Department of Social Services, helping other people's broken families while my own was quietly dismantling itself. Money I'd planned to use for travel, for experiences, for the life Harold and I had dreamed of living together before cancer took him away. Instead, that money had bought David's BMW, had paid for Jessica's designer handbags, had funded family vacations I was never invited on, and now they wanted more. They wanted everything. The back door opened, and David came out, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Mom, I know this is hard, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. But Jessica's right. We're just trying to do what's best. What's best for who? I asked. He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the lake where his father's memory had disappeared. "For everyone," he finally said. "This way, you'll be taken care of, and we won't have to worry. Won't have to worry." There it was. The truth beneath all the careful words and manufactured concern. I was a worry to be eliminated, a problem to be solved. "What if I say no?" I asked. David shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, you can't keep living the way you have been. The loans, the constant need for help. It's not sustainable." There was that word again. Sustainable. As if love was supposed to turn a profit. "I never asked for anything back," I said quietly. "I gave because I love you. Because that's what mothers do." "I know, Mom, and we're grateful, really. But love doesn't pay bills. Love doesn't handle medical emergencies or home repairs or retirement planning." I stared at my son, this stranger who looked like the boy I'd raised but spoke like a corporate accountant, and realized he didn't understand love at all. He understood transactions. He understood exchange rates and return on investment and cost-benefit analysis. But love, real, unconditional, sacrificial love, that was foreign to him. "Your father loved this house," I said, gesturing toward the building behind us. "I know, Mom, but Dad's gone. And holding on to old memories isn't helping anyone. Old memories. As if love was something that expired, something that lost value over time." We stood there in silence, two people who shared DNA and history, but had become complete strangers to each other. The cold was making my arthritis worse, sending sharp pains through my knuckles and knees, but I didn't want to go back inside. Not yet. "When did it happen?" I asked suddenly. "When did what happen? When did you stop loving me?" David looked genuinely shocked by the question. "Mom, of course I love you. This has nothing to do with love, but it had everything to do with love. Love was the only reason I'd said yes to every request, every demand, every casual assumption that my money and time belonged to them. Love was why I'd worked until I was 68 instead of retiring at 65. Love was why I ate canned soup for dinner, so I could afford to take Emma to Broadway shows she'd never remember. If you loved me," I said slowly, "you would have asked me what I wanted before deciding where I should live. You would have asked me about the house before planning to take it. You would have asked me about Harold's things before throwing them in the lake." David opened his mouth to respond, but I held up my hand. "You would have invited me to spend Christmas with your family instead of calling me to this meeting? You would have brought Emma to see me instead of sending her away? You would have seen me as a person instead of a problem to solve." "Mom," he started, but I was done listening. I walked back into the house, past Jessica, who was now on her phone, probably making more arrangements for my life without my input. I gathered my purse and coat, moving slowly because everything hurt. My body, my heart, my soul. "Where are you going?" David asked, following me. "Home," I said. "To my apartment. The one I still pay rent on. The one I still have keys to. The one you haven't managed to give away yet." "Mom, you can't just leave. We need to finish discussing the arrangements." I turned to look at him one last time. In the harsh winter light coming through the windows, he looked older than his 45 years, but also somehow smaller. Success had made him wealthy but not wise, comfortable but not happy. "David," I said quietly, "I spent your entire childhood teaching you about respect, about kindness, about treating people with dignity. I thought I raised a good man." His face flushed red. "You did raise a good man. That's what we're trying to be. Responsible. Practical." "You're being cruel," I said simply. "You're being cruel, and you're calling it kindness." I called a taxi from the landline in the kitchen, the same phone Harold had installed 15 years ago. While I waited, I sat in the living room where we used to gather for Christmas morning, where David had opened presents and squealed with delight, where Harold had read him stories by the fireplace. The room felt empty now, not just of furniture, but of joy. The fireplace was dark and cold, the windows looked out onto a lake that had become a graveyard, and the silence was broken only by Jessica's voice on her phone, making more plans for other people's lives. When the taxi arrived, David tried to pay the driver, but I pushed his money away. I had enough for the ride home, enough to maintain what little dignity I had left. As we drove away from the lake house, I watched it disappear in the rear window and realized I would probably never see it again. The place where Harold and I had made love on summer nights, where we'd taught David to swim, where we'd planned to grow old together. It was lost to me now, taken by people who saw it as an asset rather than a sanctuary. The train ride back to the city was a blur of gray winter landscape and my own reflection in the window. I looked old, I realized. Not just older, but old. Worn down by years of giving without receiving, of hoping without reason, of loving people who had forgotten how to love me back. By the time I reached my apartment in Queens, it was almost dark. The building superintendent, Mr. Antonelli, was salting the front steps and smiled when he saw me. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Watson," he said warmly. "How was your day with the family?" I almost broke down right there on the sidewalk. When was the last time someone had asked about my day and actually wanted to know the answer? "It was difficult," I managed to say. He nodded knowingly. "Family can be the hardest thing sometimes. You need anything, you just knock on my door, okay?" Inside my apartment, I sat in my reading chair and looked around at the space David and Jessica wanted me to abandon. Yes, it was small. Yes, it was old. The wallpaper was faded, the kitchen appliances were older than Emma, and the radiator made noises like a dying animal. But it was mine. I'd chosen the furniture, arranged the pictures, decided where everything belonged. It was the last place on earth where I had any control over my own life. I made myself a cup of tea, the good tea, the expensive kind I usually saved for special occasions, and sat by the window watching the snow fall on Northern Boulevard. The traffic moved slowly through the storm, headlights cutting through the darkness like hope through despair. That's when I started to really think about what had happened. Not just today, but over the years. How had I become this person? This woman who apologized for existing, who begged for scraps of attention from her own family, who paid for love that was never freely given. I thought about my job as a social worker, about all the families I'd helped over the years. I'd seen this dynamic before. Elderly parents being manipulated and controlled by adult children who saw them as burdens. I'd written reports about it, made referrals to adult protective services, testified in court about financial exploitation, but somehow I'd never seen it happening to me, maybe because it happened so gradually. A request here, a suggestion there, small boundary crossings that seemed reasonable at the time, but added up to a complete invasion of my autonomy. Like the Chinese water torture Harold used to joke about, each drop harmless by itself, but devastating in accumulation. I pulled out my old photo albums, the ones I'd been packing away in hurt and frustration over the past months. Harold smiled at me from dozens of pictures. Harold young and handsome in his army uniform, Harold proud and beaming at our wedding, Harold holding baby David with such tenderness it made my chest ache. He'd been a good father, but more than that, he'd been a good husband. He'd never dismissed my feelings or made decisions about our life without talking to me first. He'd seen me as an equal partner, not a resource to be managed. "What would you do, Harold?" I asked his picture. "What would you tell me to do?" But I already knew the answer. Harold had always been direct, honest, willing to stand up for what was right even when it was difficult. He wouldn't have tolerated being treated the way I'd been treated. He would have said no. He would have set boundaries. He would have demanded respect. The phone rang, startling me out of my memories. For a moment, my heart leaped. Maybe it was David calling to apologize. Maybe he'd realized how terrible they'd been. Maybe Christmas could still be salvaged. It was Jessica. "Margaret," she said without any greeting, "we need to talk about timing. The moving company can come next week to start packing your things. We thought it would be easier if we handled the logistics." They thought. They decided. They planned. Always they, never I. "I haven't agreed to move," I said quietly. There was a pause. "Margaret, be reasonable. We've already put down the deposit, and frankly, you can't afford to stay where you are much longer. Not without our help. Not without their help. The help that came with strings attached. The help that bound me tighter to their control with every dollar received." "What if I don't want your help anymore?" I asked. Jessica laughed. Actually laughed. "Margaret, you're 73 years old. You can't support yourself on Social Security alone, and we both know you don't have any savings left. You need us. You need us." The 4 words that had kept me trapped for years. "What I need," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice, is to be treated with respect. What I need is to have a say in my own life. Look, I know today was hard for you, Jessica said with fake sympathy, but sometimes families have to make difficult decisions. We're not the bad guys here, Margaret. We're trying to help. Trying to help. By stealing my house, spending my money, throwing away my husband's things, and warehousing me in a facility I didn't choose. I need time to think, I said. There's nothing to think about. The decision is made. David and I have legal power of attorney for financial decisions. What? The word came out as a whisper. The papers you signed last year, remember? When you were in the hospital with pneumonia? We told you they were just in case of emergency. I remembered. I'd been so sick, so scared, and they'd brought papers to the hospital. Just a precaution, David had said. Just so we can help if something happens. I'd been too weak to read them carefully, too grateful for their apparent concern to question their motives. That was for emergencies, I said. This is an emergency, Margaret. You're not capable of making sound financial decisions anymore. The way you've been spending money, the loans you can't afford. Someone needs to take control. Take control. Of my life, my money, my choices. I wasn't a person to them. I was a liability to be managed, an asset to be liquidated. I'm hanging up now, I said. Margaret, don't be dramatic. We'll call you tomorrow to discuss the moving schedule. I hung up the phone and immediately unplugged it from the wall. Then I sat in my chair, hands shaking, heart pounding, and realized I was in trouble. Real, serious trouble. They had legal control over my finances. They could force me to move, force me to sell the house, force me to do anything they wanted. And I'd signed the papers myself, trusting them to use that power only in real emergencies, never imagining they'd use it to control my entire life. I felt like I was drowning, like the weight of water was pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The walls of my apartment seemed to close in around me, and I understood for the first time how trapped I really was. But then I thought about Harold again, about the way he'd always said that giving up wasn't in our family's vocabulary. I thought about my years as a social worker, about all the clients I'd helped who'd seemed powerless until they found their strength. I might be old, I might be tired, I might be financially vulnerable, but I wasn't dead yet. And as long as I was breathing, I had choices. I plugged the phone back in and dialed a number I hadn't called in months. Legal Aid Society. This is Maria speaking. Hi, Maria. This is Margaret Watson. I used to work with you when I was with social services. I need help. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. Not a complete plan, not a perfect plan, but a plan nonetheless. I dressed carefully in my best outfit. A navy blue dress Harold had always liked. The pearl earrings he'd given me for our 20th anniversary. The good shoes I usually saved for funerals. I took the subway into Manhattan, something I hadn't done alone in over a year. The train was crowded with post-Christmas shoppers, families heading to museums, teenagers with their whole lives ahead of them. I felt invisible among them, just another old woman taking up space. But for the first time in months, that invisibility felt like a choice rather than an imposition. The legal aid office was in a building that had seen better days, but the young lawyer who met with me, Catherine Rodriguez, had sharp eyes and a handshake that meant business. Mrs. Watson, she said, reviewing the documents I'd brought, you're right to be concerned. The power of attorney you signed is quite broad, and if they're using it to make decisions you don't agree with, we need to act quickly. Can they really force me to move? I asked. Not legally, no. Power of attorney doesn't override your right to make decisions about where you live, as long as you're mentally competent. And from our conversation, it's clear you're perfectly capable of making your own decisions. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. What do I need to do? I asked. Catherine explained my options. I could revoke the power of attorney. I could contest any financial decisions they'd made without my consent. I could even pursue charges if they'd stolen money from my accounts. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be free, but it was possible. There's one thing you should know, Catherine said gently. Fighting family in court is emotionally devastating. Are you prepared for that? Are you prepared for them to cut off contact completely? I thought about Emma, about never seeing my granddaughter again, about the possibility of spending the rest of my life completely alone. The thought terrified me. But then I remembered the suitcase sinking into the lake, remembered the casual cruelty of throwing away Harold's memory, remembered being told I was no longer capable of managing my own life. Yes, I said quietly. I'm prepared. The next few days passed in a blur of paperwork and phone calls. Catherine was efficient and thorough, immediately sending letters to David and Jessica, informing them that their power of attorney was being contested and that any further financial decisions would be illegal. David called within hours of receiving the letter. "Mom, what the hell are you doing?" His voice was angrier than I'd ever heard it. "Do you have any idea how much money and time we've spent trying to help you?" "I know exactly how much of my money you've spent," I replied calmly. "That's part of the problem. This is insane. You're 73 years old and you're acting like a teenager." Jessica is beside herself. "Good," I said and meant it. Maybe now she knows how it feels to have someone else make decisions about her life without asking. "Mom, you can't fight us on this. We have documentation of every bad financial decision you've made. Every time we've had to bail you out. Every time I gave you money, you mean. Every time I said yes when you asked for help. That's not how it happened. And you know it. But I did know it. I had records too. Every check I'd written. Every withdrawal I'd made to help them. Every sacrifice I'd made that they'd reframed as poor judgment or financial instability. David," I said quietly, "I raised you to be honest. When did you start lying to yourself?" There was silence on the other end of the line. "I'm not lying, Mom. I'm trying to take care of you." "No, son. You're trying to take care of yourself. And that's fine. You're a grown man. You should take care of yourself. But you don't get to do it at my expense." "Fine," he said, his voice turning cold. "You want to do this the hard way? You want lawyers and court battles? You're going to lose, Mom. And when you do, don't come crying to us." He hung up, and I sat holding the dead phone, my heart breaking for the boy he'd once been and the man he'd become. The next call came from Jessica, her voice syrupy with false concern. "Margaret, I think there's been a misunderstanding. David is just upset because he loves you so much, and he's worried about you making decisions that might hurt you in the long run." "What decisions, Jessica?" I asked. "The decision to want to stay in my own home? The decision to want control over my own money? The decision to be treated like a human being instead of a burden?" "Of course you're a human being," she said, but her voice had an edge now. "You're David's mother, and we love you. But love sometimes means making hard choices. You keep using that word. Love. But I don't think it means what you think it means. Margaret, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. For the first time in years, I'm being completely reasonable. I'm asking for what every adult deserves: respect, dignity, and the right to make my own choices. Even if those choices are wrong, especially if they're wrong, they're my choices to make." Jessica was quiet for a moment. "Margaret, if you continue with this legal action, you need to understand that it's going to damage our relationship permanently. David is very hurt, and frankly, so am I. After everything we've done for you, everything they'd done for me, like spending my money, taking my house, throwing away my husband's belongings, and planning to warehouse me in a facility I didn't choose. Jessica," I said, "if our relationship can't survive me asking for basic respect, then maybe it wasn't much of a relationship to begin with." She hung up without another word. That evening, I sat in my apartment with a cup of tea and Harold's photo, telling him about my day. It was something I'd started doing after he died, having conversations with his picture, pretending he could hear me, pretending he was still there to offer advice and comfort. "I stood up for myself today," I told him. "For the first time in years, I actually stood up for myself." He smiled back at me from the photograph, young and handsome in his army dress uniform, the man who'd loved me unconditionally for 37 years. "I know you'd be proud of me," I whispered. "I know you'd tell me I did the right thing." But I also knew the hardest part was still coming. Fighting the legal battle was one thing. Winning it was another. And even if I won, even if I maintained control over my own life, the cost would be enormous. I might never see Emma again, might never have any family left at all. The thought terrified me, but not as much as the alternative. Not as much as spending the rest of my life as a prisoner in my own family, watching everything I'd worked for be stripped away piece by piece, while being told it was for my own good. I picked up Harold's photo and pressed it against my chest, feeling the sharp corners of the frame against my ribs. "I'm scared, Harold," I admitted. "I'm so scared of being alone." But then I realized something. I was already alone. I'd been alone for years, surrounded by people who saw me as a problem to solve rather than a person to love. At least this way, my loneliness would be honest. At least this way, I'd have my dignity. The real battle was just beginning, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was fighting for something worth winning. I was fighting for myself. Winter in Queens can feel like it lasts forever, but that January felt especially long. The legal proceedings moved slowly, as legal proceedings do, with papers filed and deadlines met and hearings scheduled and postponed. Catherine assured me we were making progress, that the power of attorney would likely be revoked, that I would regain control over my finances. But the emotional cost was higher than I'd anticipated. David stopped calling entirely. Jessica sent one text message. "We're disappointed in your choices, Margaret. When you come to your senses, you know where to find us." Emma sent me a drawing for my birthday in February. A crayon picture of a grandmother and granddaughter holding hands under a rainbow. There was no note, no message, just the drawing itself slipped under my door. I didn't know if she'd sent it herself or if David had allowed it as some kind of gesture, but I cried when I found it. I framed the drawing and put it on my kitchen table where I could see it every morning. It reminded me why I was fighting, not just for my own dignity, but for the possibility that someday Emma might understand that standing up for yourself is sometimes the most loving thing you can do. The winter nights were the hardest. Without the constant stress of managing everyone else's crises, I had time to think, to remember, to feel the full weight of what I'd lost. I'd traded my family for my freedom, and some days I wasn't sure it was worth it. But then spring came, and with it a phone call that changed everything. "Mrs. Watson? This is Susan Chen from apartment 4B. You don't really know me, but I'm Mrs. Chen's daughter." I knew Mrs. Chen from the hallway, the elderly Chinese woman who lived down the hall and sometimes brought me soup when I was sick. We'd never really talked much, but she was always kind, always smiled when we passed in the elevator. "My mother had a stroke last week," Susan continued. "She's going to be okay, but she's in the hospital, and she's been asking for you. She says you're the only friend she has in the building." Friend. Mrs. Chen considered me a friend. I visited her in the hospital that afternoon, bringing flowers from the Korean market on Northern Boulevard. She was small and fragile-looking in the hospital bed, but her eyes lit up when she saw me. "Margaret," she said in accented English, "you came." "Of course I came," I said, pulling a chair close to her bed. "How are you feeling?" We talked for an hour. The longest conversation we'd ever had. I learned that she was 81, that she'd immigrated from Taiwan 40 years ago, that her husband had died 5 years before Harold. I learned that she had 2 sons who lived in California and rarely called, that she spent most of her days alone, that she'd been watching me through her peephole for months, worrying about me. "You look so sad all the time," she said gently, "always rushing, always worried." I wanted to help, but I didn't know how. "You did help," I told her. "Every time you smiled at me in the hallway, every time you brought me soup, you helped more than you know." When I got home that evening, I realized something had shifted inside me. For months, I'd been so focused on what I'd lost, my family, my sense of belonging, my illusion of being loved unconditionally, that I'd missed what was right in front of me. Mrs. Chen considered me a friend, and she'd reached out to me in her time of need. Mr. Antonelli, the building superintendent, always asked about my day and meant it. The cashier at the grocery store, Maria, had noticed when I'd seemed particularly down and had slipped an extra coupon into my bag with a wink. I wasn't as alone as I thought I was. I'd just been looking for love in the wrong places. The next morning, I called Catherine with a decision I'd been wrestling with for weeks. "I want to drop the lawsuit," I said. "Mrs. Watson, are you sure? We're very close to a settlement. They're willing to return most of the money and revoke the power of attorney." "I'm sure," I said. I want them to revoke the power of attorney, yes. I want control over my own finances back, but I don't want to fight them in court anymore. Can I ask why? I thought about how to explain it. Because I don't want to spend whatever time I have left being angry. Because fighting them is still letting them control my life, just in a different way. Because I want to focus on building relationships with people who actually want to be in my life. Catherine was quiet for a moment. I understand, she said finally. Let me see what I can negotiate. It took another month, but we reached an agreement. David and Jessica would revoke the power of attorney and return the money they'd taken from my accounts. About $30,000. Not the full $50,000, but enough for me to feel like I'd won something important. In exchange, I would drop any criminal charges and agree not to pursue further legal action. The lake house was a different matter. They'd already started the process of transferring the deed, and since I'd signed papers allowing it during one of my more trusting moments, there wasn't much I could do legally. But honestly, I was starting to realize I didn't want it anymore. Too many painful memories, too much history of being treated badly in a place that was supposed to be about love. The day the settlement was finalized, I got a text from David. I hope you're happy now. I thought about that message for a long time. Was I happy? Not exactly. I was still lonely sometimes, still sad about what I'd lost, still worried about Emma and whether I'd ever see her again. But I was free. For the first time in years, I was making my own decisions, spending my own money, choosing how to live my own life. And that freedom, it turned out, was worth more than all the forced family dinners and obligatory holiday visits in the world. Mrs. Chen came home from the hospital in April, and I started visiting her every Tuesday afternoon. We'd have tea and watch her Chinese soap operas, and she'd tell me stories about her childhood in Taiwan while I told her about growing up in Brooklyn. Sometimes we didn't talk at all, just sat together in comfortable silence. Two old women who understood that loneliness was easier to bear when shared. Through Mrs. Chen, I met other neighbors I'd never really gotten to know. Mr. Patel from 3A, who was a retired physics professor and loved to discuss the news. Mrs. Rodriguez from 2C, who taught me to make authentic salsa and invited me to her granddaughter's quinceañera. The young couple in 1B who sometimes brought me their extra vegetables from their community garden plot. I started volunteering at the local senior center, helping other elderly people navigate the same kinds of family conflicts I'd experienced. It was heartbreaking work. So many stories of adult children who saw their aging parents as burdens rather than blessings. So many lonely people who'd been convinced they were worthless. But it was also healing work. Every person I helped, every boundary I helped someone else set, every time I validated someone's right to dignity and respect, it reinforced my own worth, my own right to be treated well. Summer came, and with it, my 74th birthday. I didn't expect anything. No cards, no calls, no acknowledgement from the family I'd fought so hard to keep. But Mrs. Chen organized a small party in the building's community room, and a dozen neighbors showed up with homemade food and genuine smiles. Mr. Antonelli made a toast. To Margaret, who teaches us all that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. I cried. But they were happy tears. Tears of gratitude for these people who saw value in me simply because I existed, not because of what I could give them. That evening, as I was cleaning up from the party, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Emma standing in the hallway with a woman I didn't recognize. Young, probably in her 30s, with the same dark hair as my granddaughter. Grammy! Emma threw her arms around me, and I felt my heart fill up with more joy than it could contain. This is my mom, Emma said, pulling back to look at me, but I was confused. Jessica was her mom, and this wasn't Jessica. I'm Sarah, the young woman said, extending her hand. David's ex-wife, Emma's biological mother. The world tilted sideways. David's ex-wife, Emma's biological mother. I'd known David had been married before, briefly, when he was in his 20s, but I'd been told his first wife had died. I don't understand, I said, inviting them both inside. Sarah sat on my couch while Emma immediately went to examine every inch of my apartment, fascinated by this place she'd never been allowed to visit. David and I divorced when Emma was 2, Sarah explained. He got primary custody because I was young and struggling financially. I remarried and moved to Seattle, but I've stayed in touch with Emma, had her for summers and holidays when I could afford the flights. But Jessica said Emma was her daughter, I said, still confused. Sarah's face darkened. Jessica has been telling everyone that Emma is hers. She's been trying to erase me completely from Emma's life, and apparently from the family history. I felt sick. Another lie. Another deception. Another way that David and Jessica had manipulated the truth to control the narrative. Emma talks about you all the time, Sarah continued. She's been begging to see you, asking why she can't visit her Grammy anymore. When she told me what happened at Christmas, about the fight and the lawyers and everything, I decided it was time to bring her here myself. You know about the legal battle? I asked. Sarah nodded. David called me in March, said you were having mental health issues and that it might not be safe for Emma to be around you. He asked me to keep her away from you permanently. Mental health issues. Of course, that's how he'd framed it. Standing up for myself had been recast as mental instability. But Emma kept insisting that you were fine, that you were the same Grammy you'd always been, just sadder. She said Jessica was mean to you and that David never stood up for you. So I started asking questions. Emma had seen it all. My 10-year-old granddaughter had witnessed the emotional abuse, the manipulation, the casual cruelty, and she'd recognized it for what it was. I'm so sorry I didn't reach out sooner, Sarah said. I should have questioned their version of events, should have trusted Emma's judgment. You're here now, I said, watching Emma examine the drawing she'd sent me for my birthday, now framed and displayed prominently on my kitchen table. You kept it, she said, delighted. I wasn't sure you'd gotten it. It's my most treasured possession, I told her honestly. We spent the afternoon together, the three of us, and I learned more about my granddaughter in those few hours than I'd learned in the previous 2 years. She was smart and funny and kind, with her grandfather Harold's sense of justice and her own fierce independence. She told me about school and her friends and her new stepfather who taught her to play chess. She told me about feeling confused and sad when she wasn't allowed to see me anymore, about missing our trips to the museum and our Saturday morning pancakes. Jessica said you didn't want to see me anymore, Emma said quietly. She said you were too old and tired to spend time with kids. My heart broke all over again. They'd told her I didn't want her, had made her believe that her beloved Grammy had simply stopped loving her. Emma, I said, kneeling down to look her in the eye, I have never, not for one single day, stopped wanting to see you. I love you more than all the stars in the sky, and nothing will ever change that. Then why didn't you call me? She asked, tears in her eyes. Because your father wouldn't let me, and I thought fighting him might hurt you more than helping you. She hugged me then, fierce and tight, and whispered in my ear, next time, fight anyway. I'm tougher than they think. Next time, fight anyway. Wisdom from a 10-year-old that cut straight to the truth. Sarah and Emma stayed for dinner. Grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, Emma's favorite. We looked at photo albums and watched an old movie and talked about everything and nothing. For a few precious hours, my apartment felt full of family again. Real family. The kind built on love rather than obligation. When it was time for them to leave, Sarah gave me her phone number and email address. I live in Seattle now, but I visit New York every few months for work, she said. And Emma has school breaks. Maybe she could spend some time with you? I'd love that, I said, meaning it with every fiber of my being. Emma hugged me goodbye, promising to email me every week and call me every Sunday. I love you, Grammy, she said. I love you too, sweetheart. Remember, you fight when you need to fight, but you also choose your battles carefully. Some people are worth fighting for, and some fights aren't worth having. After they left, I sat in my quiet apartment and realized that the fight had been worth it after all. Not because I'd won money or legal victories, but because I'd maintained my dignity long enough for the people who truly loved me to find their way back. August brought a heat wave that made my unair-conditioned apartment almost unbearable. But it also brought another unexpected visitor. I was sitting by my window at 6 a.m, trying to catch whatever breeze might exist, when I saw a familiar figure on the sidewalk below. David was standing on the corner, looking up at my building, holding what appeared to be a cup of coffee and a paper bag. My first instinct was to duck away from the window, to pretend I hadn't seen him, but Emma's words echoed in my head. Next time, fight anyway. Maybe this was a time for fighting. Maybe this was a time for truth. I went downstairs and found him still standing there, looking older and more uncertain than I'd ever seen him. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. "David." We stood there for a moment in awkward silence, the traffic on Northern Boulevard providing the only sound between us. "I brought you coffee," he said finally, holding out the cup. "From that place on Astoria Boulevard you used to like." I took the coffee, surprised that he remembered my preferences after all this time. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Just for a few minutes?" I almost said no. I'd spent months building a life that didn't revolve around his needs and wants, months learning to be happy without his approval. Why risk that peace for a conversation that would probably just hurt us both? But then I thought about Emma, about the woman I wanted to be for her, about the example I wanted to set. Sometimes fighting means standing your ground. Sometimes it means being willing to listen. "We can walk," I said, "but just for a few minutes." We headed toward the small park a few blocks away, walking slowly in the early morning heat. David kept starting to speak and then stopping, like he couldn't find the right words. Finally, as we sat on a bench under a struggling maple tree, he said, "I saw Sarah and Emma last week." I waited, letting him fill the silence. "Emma told me about visiting you. She said you guys had a good time." "We did. She also told me some things I didn't want to hear. About how Jessica talked to you, about how I talked to you, about how we made you feel." I still didn't say anything. This was his conversation to have, his amends to make or not make. "Mom, I think I lost sight of something important. I got so focused on being practical, on solving problems and managing situations, that I forgot you're not a problem to be solved. You're my mother." It was the first time in years he'd acknowledged my humanity instead of just my utility. "The thing is," he continued, "I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to undo the damage we did, the trust we broke. Jessica and I are getting divorced, by the way." That surprised me. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. I wouldn't have chosen Jessica as a daughter-in-law, but I'd never wanted David's marriage to fail. "No, you're not," he said with a sad smile. "And you don't have to pretend to be. Jessica is a lot like I became, I guess. Everything is about control and efficiency and getting ahead. She never understood why I wanted to repair things with you. And you do? Want to repair things?" David was quiet for a long moment, staring at the traffic passing by the park. "I want to try," he said finally. "I want Emma to have her grandmother in her life. I want to be the kind of man Dad raised me to be instead of the kind of man success turned me into." I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but a willingness to consider the possibility of forgiveness. "It's going to take time," I said. "A lot of time, and things can never go back to the way they were. I know. I'm not going to be the family bank anymore. I'm not going to say yes to every request just to keep the peace. I'm not going to apologize for having opinions or wanting to be included in decisions about my own life. I understand. And I'm not going to pretend that what happened didn't happen. The lake house, Harold's things, the power of attorney, all of it was wrong, and I'm not going to minimize it to make you feel better." David's face flushed, but he nodded. "You're right. All of it was wrong." We sat there for a while longer, not talking, just existing in the same space for the first time in months. It wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. It was a beginning, maybe. "Emma wants to spend Thanksgiving with you this year," David said eventually. "Sarah already asked me about that. Would it be okay if I came too? Not to take over or control anything, just to be there with both of you?" I thought about it. The old me would have said yes immediately, grateful for any scrap of attention. The new me wanted to be more cautious. "We'll see," I said. "Let's start smaller. Maybe you could come have dinner with Emma and me next time she visits. We'll see how that goes." "Okay," he said. "That sounds fair." As we walked back to my building, David asked, "Mom, are you happy? I mean, with your life now?" It was a good question, one I'd been asking myself a lot lately. "I'm content," I said finally. "I'm not lonely anymore. Not the way I was. I have friends who care about me for who I am, not what I can do for them. I make my own choices, even if they're sometimes wrong choices, And I don't wake up every morning wondering how I can make other people love me. Do you think you'll ever forgive us, Jessica and me? Another good question, one I wasn't ready to answer completely. I'm working on it, I said. But forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting, and it doesn't mean going back to old patterns. David nodded, looking like he understood, maybe for the first time. I love you, Mom, he said, as we reached the front door of my building. I know I haven't shown it very well, but I do love you. I love you too, David. I never stopped loving you. That was never the problem. The problem was that love without respect isn't really love at all. It's just need dressed up in prettier clothes. Fall came early that year, and with it a series of small victories. Mrs. Chen and I started a weekly book club in the building's community room, and 6 other residents joined us. I began teaching a financial literacy class at the senior center, helping other elderly people avoid the mistakes I'd made, the traps I'd fallen into. Emma spent Columbus Day weekend with me, and David came for Sunday dinner as we'd discussed. It was awkward at first. Too much history between us. Too much hurt to pretend everything was normal. But Emma was a natural diplomat, filling awkward silences with stories about school and questions about our old family traditions. Tell Daddy about the time you and Grandpa Harold got lost in Central Park, she said, and I found myself sharing memories I hadn't talked about in years. David listened carefully, asking questions about his father, about stories he'd forgotten or never heard. For a few hours, we were just 3 people sharing a meal and remembering someone we'd all loved. It wasn't perfect. David still had a tendency to offer unsolicited advice about my finances, and I still felt defensive every time he asked about my plans or my health. But we were both trying, both working to build something new on the ruins of what we'd lost. November brought an unexpected gift. I was walking back from the grocery store when I saw a familiar figure sitting on the stoop of my building. At first, I thought it was Emma, the same dark hair, the same slight build. But as I got closer, I realized it was a young woman, maybe in her early 20s, with Emma's eyes and David's stubborn chin. "Excuse me," she said, standing up as I approached. "Are you Margaret Watson?" "Yes," I said cautiously. "I'm Amy, David's daughter, Emma's half-sister." The world stopped spinning for a moment. Another granddaughter, another family secret revealed. "I know this is weird," Amy continued quickly, "and I know you don't know me. David and my mom split up when I was really little, and he's never really been in my life. But Emma tracked me down on social media, and she's been telling me about you, and She took a deep breath. "I wanted to meet my grandmother. I dropped my grocery bags right there on the sidewalk and hugged her. This young woman who looked like David but had Sarah's courage in seeking out the family she'd never known." "Of course you did," I said, tears streaming down my face. "Of course you wanted to meet your grandmother. Come upstairs, sweetheart. Let's get to know each other." Amy spent the afternoon with me, telling me about her life, her job as a teacher in the Bronx, her fiancé who was in medical school. She showed me pictures on her phone, her graduation from college, her engagement party, moments from a life I'd never been part of, but wanted to celebrate anyway. "Emma says you're the best grandmother in the world," Amy said. "She says you make the best grilled cheese sandwiches and that you always listen really carefully when she talks." "Emma is a special girl," I said. "And so are you, from what I can see." "I don't know David very well," Amy admitted. "He sends birthday cards and Christmas gifts, but we don't really have a relationship. But Emma says he's been trying to be better, trying to fix things with you." "He is trying," I said. "I'm not sure how well it's working, but he's trying." "Would it be okay if I came to visit sometimes? I mean, I don't want to make things complicated with David or anything, but I'd like to have a grandmother, if you're interested." If I was interested. This beautiful young woman wanted me in her life, and she was asking if I was interested. "Amy," I said, "I would be honored to be your grandmother." We made plans for her to come for dinner the following week, and to spend Christmas Eve together if her fiancé couldn't get time off from the hospital. Another thread in the tapestry of family I was weaving. Not the family I'd been born into or married into, but the family I was choosing to build. Thanksgiving arrived with an early snowfall that made Queens look almost magical. Emma came down on the train with Sarah, and David drove in from Long Island, carrying flowers and a bottle of wine, and what appeared to be genuine nervousness about how the day would go. I'd never hosted Thanksgiving before. Harold and I had always gone to his sister's house, and after he died, I'd usually been invited to David and Jessica's elaborate dinner parties, where I'd felt like an accessory rather than family. This year, I was in charge of my own holiday, cooking for people who actually wanted to be there. Mrs. Chen joined us, bringing homemade dumplings and stories about Taiwanese harvest festivals. Mr. Patel came with his famous curry and tales of Diwali celebrations. Amy brought her fiancé, Marcus, who charmed everyone with his easy laugh and his willingness to help with dishes. It was chaotic and loud and imperfect. The turkey was a little dry. Emma spilled cranberry sauce on her dress, and David and I had one tense moment when he tried to organize the cleanup without asking if I wanted help. But it was real. It was chosen. It was love without strings attached. After dinner, as we all sat around my small living room feeling too full and too grateful to move, Emma crawled onto my lap and whispered in my ear, "This is the best Thanksgiving ever, Grammy." "Why, sweetheart?" "Because everyone here actually wants to be here, and because you look happy." She was right. I did look happy. I felt happy. Not the desperate, grasping happiness I'd tried to manufacture by pleasing everyone around me, but the quiet, steady happiness that comes from knowing your own worth. That night, after everyone had gone home and I was washing the last of the dishes, I thought about the suitcase in the lake. Harold's tools and our photographs were still down there, buried under ice and mud and the weight of winter. I would never get them back. Those physical reminders of our life together were lost forever. But the memories weren't lost. The love wasn't lost. The lessons Harold had taught me about dignity and respect and standing up for yourself, those were still mine, still part of me, still guides for how to live. The suitcase sinking had felt like the end of something precious. But maybe it had been the beginning of something even more valuable. The beginning of me learning to treasure myself the way Harold had treasured me, the way Emma treasured me, the way real family should treasure each other. Christmas came with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. Emma spent Christmas Eve with Amy and me, and we started new traditions, making cookies shaped like snowflakes, watching old movies, telling stories about the people we loved. David called Christmas morning to wish me well, and for the first time in years, the conversation felt genuine rather than obligatory. "Mom," he said, "I have something to tell you. I've been working with a therapist, trying to understand how I became the kind of person who could treat you the way I did." "That's good, David. I'm glad you're getting help." She says I have to make amends, not just apologize, but actually try to repair the damage I did. And I know I can't give you back your trust or undo the hurt I caused, but I want to try to give you back something. "What do you mean?" "The lake house. I want to deed it back to you. It was never really mine to take." I was quiet for a moment, thinking. The lake house held so many painful memories now. The suitcase, the confrontation, the casual cruelty of that Christmas morning that seemed like a lifetime ago. "David, I appreciate the gesture, but I don't want the house back." "You don't?" "No. Too much has happened there. But I have an idea for what you could do with it instead." I told him about the senior center where I volunteered, about how many elderly people spent holidays alone, about how much good could be done with a place where isolated seniors could gather for meals and activities and companionship. "You could donate it?" I said. "Create something beautiful from something that became ugly." David was quiet for a long time. "That's a really good idea, Mom. I'll look into it." And David, the therapist, is right about making amends. But the most important amend you can make is to never treat anyone the way you treated me. Not Emma, not Amy, not your next partner, not yourself. "I understand," he said. "And Mom, thank you for not giving up on me completely." "I never gave up on you, son. I gave up on being willing to accept mistreatment. There's a difference." Spring returned to Queens with an explosion of color that seemed more vibrant than I remembered. Mrs. Chen and I planted herbs in the community garden behind our building. Amy brought Marcus by for dinner regularly, and I got to know this young man who would soon make me a step-great-grandmother. Emma spent spring break with me, and we took the train into Manhattan to visit museums and walk through Central Park, retracing steps Harold and I had taken decades ago. I was standing in the Brooklyn Botanic Garden one April afternoon, surrounded by cherry blossoms and the sound of children playing, when I realized I was genuinely happy. Not content, not managing, not getting by, but actually, truly happy. The old Margaret would have been afraid of that happiness, would have waited for the other shoe to drop, for someone to take it away. But this Margaret had learned that happiness isn't something that happens to you. It's something you create, something you choose, something you protect. I thought about the woman I'd been 2 years ago, sitting in her cold apartment, accepting crumbs of affection from people who saw her as a burden. That woman had been so afraid of being alone that she'd forgotten she was already lonely. She'd been so afraid of losing love that she'd accepted substitutes: duty, obligation, guilt disguised as care. But love isn't something you can buy or bargain for. Love isn't something you earn by making yourself useful or indispensable. Real love sees you as valuable simply because you exist, not because of what you can provide. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the cherry blossoms, then sent it to Emma with a message. Beautiful things are worth waiting for, and worth protecting once you find them. She texted back immediately. Like grandmothers? Like granddaughters, I replied. And like learning to love yourself. Summer brought another surprise. A letter from Jessica. I almost threw it away without opening it, but curiosity got the better of me. Margaret, it began, I know you have no reason to read this, and even less reason to believe anything I say, but I wanted you to know that the divorce proceedings have given me time to think about a lot of things, including how I treated you. The letter went on for 2 pages, acknowledging specific incidents, expressing regret for financial manipulation, apologizing for the suitcase incident that had started it all. It didn't excuse anything or try to minimize the damage, and it didn't ask for forgiveness. I know I can't undo the hurt I caused, the letter concluded, but I wanted you to know that you were right to fight back, right to demand better treatment. I hope you're living the life you deserve now. I read the letter 3 times, then filed it away. It didn't change anything. I had no interest in rebuilding a relationship with Jessica, but it confirmed something I'd suspected. Standing up for myself hadn't just freed me from a toxic dynamic. It had forced everyone around me to confront the roles they'd been playing. Some of them, like David, had chosen to do the work of becoming better people. Others, like Jessica, had simply moved on to find easier targets. But all of them had been forced to reckon with the consequences of treating another human being as disposable. The anniversary of that terrible Christmas came and went without the pain I'd expected. Instead of dwelling on what I'd lost that day, I focused on what I'd gained. The knowledge that I was worth fighting for, the understanding that dignity was not negotiable, the courage to choose love over fear. Emma, now 11 and wise beyond her years, spent that Christmas week with me, and we talked about the lessons we'd both learned. "Grammy," she said as we sat by my window watching snow fall on Northern Boulevard, "do you ever regret fighting with Daddy and Jessica?" It was a profound question from such a young person. "I regret that it was necessary," I said carefully. "I regret that they couldn't see my worth without me having to prove it in court. But I don't regret standing up for myself, because that's how you and Amy and I found each other. That's how I learned I was capable of more than I thought." "Do you think people can really change?" she asked. "Some people can," I said. "People who want to change, who are willing to do the hard work. But you can't change people for them, and you can't love someone into treating you better. Is that why you divorced yourself from them?" "Divorced myself from them. What a perfect way to put it. In a way, yes. I divorced myself from accepting poor treatment. And sometimes that feels lonely. But it's better than the kind of lonely I was before. The kind where you're surrounded by people but still feel invisible." Emma curled up against me, and I stroked her hair the way I used to do when she was smaller. "I'm proud of you, Grammy," she said, "for being brave. I'm proud of you too, sweetheart, for seeing what was happening and speaking up about it, even when the adults around you were pretending everything was fine. Will you teach me to be brave like you? You're already brave, Emma. But yes, I'll teach you everything I've learned about standing up for yourself, about knowing your worth, about choosing the people who choose you back." As I write this, it's been 3 years since that Christmas morning by the lake. 3 years since I watched my daughter-in-law throw Harold's suitcase into the dark water, taking with it the last of my illusions about unconditional family love. I'm 76 years old now, And I live in the same apartment in Queens that David and Jessica once tried to force me to leave. Mrs. Chen and I are best friends, planning our first trip together, a cruise to Alaska that we've been saving for. Amy and Marcus got married last spring, and I walked her down the aisle because her biological father couldn't be bothered to show up. Emma is in middle school now, full of opinions and attitude and the kind of confidence I wish I'd had at her age. David and I have what you might call a cordial relationship. We have dinner once a month, and he's learned to ask about my life instead of trying to manage it. He donated the lake house to the senior center as I suggested, and it's now a thriving community space for elderly people who need somewhere to belong. I volunteer there twice a week, leading support groups for seniors dealing with family conflicts, financial exploitation, and emotional abuse. It's painful work, listening to stories so similar to my own, but it's also healing work. Every time I help someone recognize their worth, every time I watch someone find the courage to say no, I'm reminded of how far I've come. The other day, a woman about my age came to the support group for the first time. Her adult son had been pressuring her to sell her house and move in with him and his wife, and she was starting to suspect it was more about accessing her equity than caring for her well-being. "I love him so much," she said, tears running down her cheeks. "How can I say no to someone I love?" I reached across the circle and took her hand. "The question isn't how you can say no to someone you love," I told her. "The question is how someone who claims to love you can ignore what you want and need." She looked at me with the same expression I probably had 3 years ago. The dawning realization that love and manipulation could look very similar from the inside, but felt completely different when you stepped back far enough to see the whole picture. "It's scary," she whispered. "Standing up for yourself when you're old and you don't have anyone else." "Yes," I said. "It is scary. But you know what's scarier? Spending whatever time you have left apologizing for taking up space in your own life? I think about Harold often, about what he would make of the woman I've become. I think he'd be proud of me for finally learning the lesson he tried to teach me for 37 years, that I was worthy of respect, worthy of kindness, worthy of love that didn't come with conditions attached. The suitcase is still down there in the lake, buried under years of silt and seasons. Harold's tools, our photographs, the physical evidence of our life together, all of it lost forever to the cold, dark water. But I'm not lost anymore. I know who I am now, not in relation to other people, but as a complete person in my own right. I know my worth isn't determined by how useful I am or how much I can give away. I know the difference between being alone and being lonely, between solitude and isolation, between love and need. Most importantly, I know that it's never too late to save yourself, never too late to demand better, never too late to choose dignity over desperation, respect over approval, truth over the comfortable lies we tell ourselves about family loyalty. The cherry blossoms are blooming again in the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, and Mrs. Chen and I are planning another visit next week. Emma is coming for Easter, bringing stories about her new boyfriend and her plans for high school next year. Amy calls every Sunday, sharing news about her pregnancy and asking for advice about dealing with her own complicated family dynamics. This is what family looks like when you stop settling for less than you deserve. This is what love feels like when it's freely given rather than desperately purchased. This is what happiness sounds like when you're not constantly afraid someone will take it away. I'm an old woman now, with arthritis in my hands and silver in my hair and lines on my face that map out 7 decades of joy and sorrow, triumph and loss. But I'm also a woman who learned to fight for herself when it mattered most, who discovered that the only approval she really needed was her own. Have you ever lived something like this? Have you ever found yourself paying for love that should have been free, apologizing for needs that were reasonable, accepting treatment that diminished your spirit? Have you watched someone you care about disappear piece by piece into a relationship or family dynamic that slowly eroded their sense of self-worth? Share your story in the comments below. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is witness each other's struggles and victories, to let each other know that we're not alone in learning these hard lessons about love and boundaries and the courage it takes to save ourselves. If this story touched something in your heart, If it reminded you of your own worth or gave you permission to demand better treatment in your own life, please like this video and subscribe. It helps me continue sharing these stories, these truths about family and love, and the strength we find when we finally decide we deserve better. Remember, no matter how old you are, no matter how long you've been accepting less than you deserve, no matter how afraid you are of being alone, you are worth fighting for. You are worth protecting. You are worth love that doesn't ask you to shrink yourself or disappear or apologize for existing. Most of all, remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is teach people how to treat you properly, even if that lesson is hard for them to learn. The sun is setting over Queens now, painting my small apartment in shades of gold and promise. Mrs. Chen will be by soon for our evening tea, and we'll plan tomorrow's adventures while we watch the world slow down outside my window. It's a good life I'm living now. Not perfect, not without sadness or challenge, but good, real, mine. And that, it turns out, is more than enough.